imagine losing a loved one in a brutal murder? This is something most of us would not even want to think about, but what if it happens? In this really tragic case, a girl went out jogging and never came back. Her family and friends spent weeks looking everywhere for her, and when they finally found her, it was not as they had imagined. What could have happened? So brace yourselves, and let's investigate the girl who went jogging and never came back. Mollie Cecilia Tibbetts was born on May 8, 1998, in San Francisco, California, to Rob and Laura. According to her dad, they had wanted to name her Grace, but when they looked at her for the first time, they decided she wasn't a Grace after all. She was more of a Mollie. Mollie grew up in a loving family with her two brothers, Jake and Scott, who really adored her. She was a happy kid, always smiling and making people laugh, but she was also kind and caring and loving. She made everyone feel special. Because of this, she had so many friends. However, when Mollie was in second grade, her parents unfortunately divorced, and she, along with her mother and brothers, moved to Brooklyn, Iowa, leaving their father in California. This was really tough for Mollie and her brothers, but despite everything, they still managed to adjust and keep in close contact with their father. Mollie went to Brooklyn Guernsey Malcolm High School, where she participated in the choir, ran cross country, and was in the debate team. She also loved giving uplifting speeches, like in this video, which was taken in 2016 as she delivered an inspiring message to her classmates.
Everyone has their own talent, whether it's a sport you're good at, or if you're good at dance, or if you're a great writer.
In October 2015, while she was a junior in high school, Mollie met a guy by the name of Dalton Jack, a high school senior and football player. That evening, Dalton and one of his friends were hanging out in his truck after a football game when Mollie and another girl approached them, and Mollie, not wanting to be left out of the conversation, went around to the driver's window and started talking to Dalton. The two quickly hit it off, and Dalton, who she thought was cute and funny, asked her for her phone number. 2 weeks later, they went on their first date, and that led to another and another. Their dates consisted of dinners and movies and just hanging out, and as their love blossomed, they became completely inseparable. Even when 2 years later, Mollie left to study psychology at the University of Iowa, and Dalton stayed in Brooklyn, working construction. They still remained committed to each other, and spent the weekends and sometimes weekdays together. After finishing her freshman year, in May 2018, Mollie came back to Brooklyn for summer and kept herself busy working at a children's day camp at Grinnell Regional Medical Center, not far from Brooklyn. In the evenings, she would spend time studying and preparing for her sophomore year, and then go out for a run around town. Sadly, it was during one of these runs that she mysteriously vanished. On July 18, 2018, Dalton, who was at the time living with his brother, was going out of town for work while his brother was going away with his fiancée. Dalton called Mollie and asked if she could come over and look after his two dogs, and Mollie agreed. At around 5:30 p.m., Mollie's older brother Jake dropped her off at Dalton's house. He never imagined that it would be the last time he would ever see his sister again. At around 7:30 p.m., Mollie took a selfie and sent it to Dalton, then put on her gym shorts, sports bra, and running shoes, and went out for her usual evening run. But this time around, she never came back. Dalton saw Mollie's selfie later that night, but did not reply straight away since he had assumed that she would be in bed at that time. Early the next morning, he sent her a text, but she never replied. He sent her another text at noon, but still nothing. Then one of her coworkers at Grinnell called him to ask why she hadn't shown up for work that day or called in sick.
I looked back at my messages and she hadn't opened a single one of them or read a single one of them. So I started throwing red flags and started calling everybody to see if they got in contact with her, and everybody had come up blank.
At this point, Dalton started to get worried, and he called Mollie's family to tell them what was happening. Her family immediately called the police, and a few hours later, the search for Mollie officially began. With the help of the police and dozens of volunteers, they combed through cornfields, farm buildings, sheds, and open spaces around Brooklyn looking for her. Her dad flew in from California to be a part of the search team, and they distributed posters, t-shirts, and buttons all over town, begging anyone with information to come forward.
People here in the state that saw something or know something, that get back to the authorities with that information that ultimately will bring Mollie back. She's a real person, not a missing girl on a poster.
Her brother Jake, who was the last person to see her, said that he dropped her off at Dalton's house at around 5:30 p.m. that Wednesday.
You never think you're going to see your sister on a poster with a missing sign right across it.
Days went by without any news of her whereabouts, and her family grew more and more desperate trying to find her. As days turned into weeks, the reward money continued to increase and would eventually reach $400,000. Police received thousands of tips and even rolled out an interactive website to help jog people's memory. They conducted over 500 interviews and looked into Mollie's Fitbit data, hoping to locate her, but got nowhere. It's like she had vanished into thin air. In August 2018, about a month after Mollie's disappearance, a neighbor who had been going through his home security footage noticed something really suspicious. He immediately called the police and handed them the footage. And after watching for hours, investigators found what would be their first clue in the case. On the day of the disappearance, at around 7:45, the surveillance camera captured a figure, which was assumed to be Mollie, running in an area east of Brooklyn. Then, just a few seconds later, a black Chevy Malibu was spotted driving in her direction. Nothing really strange about this yet, but then as investigators continued watching the video, they noticed that the car drove through again 2 minutes later, heading in the opposite direction. And then again, a minute later, heading towards the jogger's direction. Then 20 minutes later, it was captured a final time, getting a bit faster in the direction it came from. Then 20 minutes later, it was captured a final time, going a bit faster in the direction that it came from. That was totally suspicious, and investigators felt that it had something to do with Mollie's disappearance. They immediately started searching for the vehicle, and in such a small community of less than 1,500, it was not hard to find it. The car belonged to a guy by the name of Christiane Bahina Rivera, and when the police impounded it, they found blood stains in the trunk, which later turned out to be Mollie's. Christiane was immediately arrested and brought in for questioning. At first, he tried to deny even knowing Mollie or anything about her disappearance, but on further interrogation, he finally cracked and gave a chilling account of how everything happened. Christiane, who was a 24-year-old at the time, lived and worked in Poweshiek County. He was originally from El Guayabo, Guerrero, and arrived illegally in the United States when he was 17. He had lived in Iowa for several years, working in various dairy farms around the area. When this incident happened, he was working at Yarraby Farms, where he also lived in a mobile house. His boss and coworkers said that they never suspected anything out of the ordinary with Christiane. He always came to work on time and got along well with everyone, so they were shocked to learn that he might be connected to Mollie's disappearance. After hours in the interrogation room, Christiane told investigators that he saw Mollie running that evening and thought that she was attractive and hot. So he started following her and hitting on her, but Mollie was not interested. At one point, Christiane even got out of the car and started jogging alongside her, but Mollie, who was now creeped out, took out her phone and threatened to call the cops if he didn't leave her alone. But that didn't stop him, and he continued to pursue her. He told investigators that Mollie started screaming and slapping him, which made him angry, and he blacked out. The next thing he remembered was him driving to a cornfield in Poweshiek County, and when he looked down on his lap, he saw an earpiece from Mollie's headphones and realized she was in the trunk of his car. He went out to get her, and that's when he noticed blood on the side of her head. He claimed he could not remember anything about the fight and how he hurt her, but he remembered taking her out of his trunk and carrying her over his shoulder to the cornfield, where he laid her face up and covered her with corn stalks. Christiane told the police that Mollie was from the head and neck, and that she felt like a person who had just fainted. He later led the police to a secluded part of the cornfield, where they found Mollie's half-naked body already decomposing due to the hot and humid condition of Iowa. An autopsy showed that she had been stabbed with a sharp object, possibly a knife, around 7 to 12 times in her chest, ribs, skull, and hand. Some of her clothes were also found in the area, but the police could not find the murder weapon. Mollie's friends and family were completely devastated when they got the news about her body being discovered. They were equally outraged when they learned how she had died. This story became even bigger news when then-President Donald Trump saw it as an opportunity to push his agenda of having restrictive immigration policies and building a border wall. However, Mollie's dad, Rob, came out to strongly oppose this and asked the politicians not to use his daughter's murder for their own selfish agendas. Do not appropriate Mollie's soul in advancing views she believed were profoundly racist. The act grievously extends the crime that stole Mollie from our family and is, to quote Donald Trump Jr., heatless and despicable. Christiane was arrested and charged with first-degree homicide, and guys, you might think that since he had already confessed and there was a ton of evidence against him, that this would be an open and shut case, but it was actually much more complicated than that. To start with, the case experienced a lot of delays before it could finally go to trial on May 17th, 2021. Then, Christiane shocked everyone when he changed his story and told an entirely different account of how things happened. In this new account, he claimed that on that day, 2 masked men took him from his house at point and forced him to get into his car and drive around town. When they came across Mollie, he said that the men made him circle around several times before stopping along a gravel road near where Mollie was last seen. One man then got out of the car for like 10 to 12 minutes, and when he came back, he put something heavy in the trunk of the car and told him to drive away. Then at some point, the men ran away after threatening to kill his family, including his girlfriend and his 3-year-old daughter, if he ever said anything. When he went to check the car's trunk, he found Mollie barely alive, and since he could not save her, he carried her into a cornfield and covered her with corn stalks so she's not too exposed to the sun. Of course, no one believed this story, and his defense team had to come up with some other way to prove that he was innocent. And their next strategy was to find another person to blame, and that person was Mollie's boyfriend, Dalton. They claimed that Dalton could have been the one that hurt Mollie and blamed it on Christiane. They brought up anger issues and the fact that he had cheated on Mollie some time back. However, the prosecution pointed out that Christiane was the only suspect in the case, and that Dalton had already been cleared as a suspect and had a strong alibi confirming that he was out of town for work that day. After 2 weeks of trial, the jury deliberated for several hours and found Christiane guilty of the crime. But before he could be sentenced, some 2 witnesses came forward and claimed that another guy had admitted killing Mollie and blaming everything on Christiane. One of the witnesses told investigators that the 21-year-old man with a history of hurting women had told him that he had kidnapped Mollie and brought her to a trap house used for trafficking and then killed her. The defense used this new information to claim that the police had not thoroughly investigated the case and could have gotten the wrong guy. However, these claims were thrown out as investigators could not find anything connecting Mollie to the said trap house or the man. So finally, Christiane was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Before the sentencing, a moving statement from Mollie's mother, Laura, was read in court where she told Christiane to imagine the pain that his actions had caused her family.
Because of your act, Mr. Rivera, I will never get to see my daughter become a mother. I do hope one day Paulina has the opportunity to become a mother, but how will she ever explain to her children who their grandfather is? This is the legacy you left behind for your only child, Mr. Rivera.
What do you think about this story? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section.